I used to drink in a pub in town. It's very cozy, stone walls, horse brasses, open fireplace right in the middle, typical for Yorkshire, where I live. Small bar, again, typical, hence the queues. Toilets around the corner from the seating, and a small door at the front of the building, with another at the back. Every time I went in, there was an older man, nicknamed by the locals, Smiler. I never knew his real name, just that he used to always have a huge, vacant smile on his face. He may have had some sort of hearing or speaking problem, as whenever anyone ever spoke to him, his grin would widen and he'd just nod. Who always stood round the corner from the seating, just outside the ladies' toilets. This man had been there every time I'd been in the pub for over 20 years, whatever time of the day I went. I was always polite and said hello, smile and nod response. 10 years ago was the last time I went in the pub. The previous time I'd been there, the bar staff had let me know that Smiler had passed away. He died in bed in a run-down old house that had been passed down by his dad. This particular night, I had 2 drinks and needed the toilet as I walked around the corner, Smiler turned to face me. I quickly went back to my seat, had another drink and held it. After at least another 20 minutes and another drink, there was no holding back. I went back round to the toilet. He was still there. I walked to the door and said, "Hi, Smiler." He responded as usual with a nod, and then I went into the toilet. I used the toilet, checked my lipstick, and went back out. Smiler had gone, and I haven't seen him since. My girl and I were on a road trip one weekend, heading to a secluded campsite in the Catskills. We had been driving for 3 hours. There was still a long way to go, and we were getting tired and hungry. We decided to look for a place to eat and rest for a while, when we saw a sign that said, "Welcome to Harmony, population 512. Now, we've been living in New York for many years, and we've been going on weekend getaways like this because we like to discover new towns and go on adventures together. We thought that it was a town we hadn't visited before and took the opportunity, so I turned the car around and went down the narrow paved road. As we got into town, we noticed that the buildings looked very old-fashioned and quaint. There were wooden houses, a church, a school, a general store, and a diner, but there were no people loitering around like in most towns. We parked our car near the diner and got out. We felt a strange sensation, as if there were eyes looking at us, and they didn't feel friendly. The air had that metallic odor, and there was a faint smell of old rotting wood and something else that made me shiver. My girlfriend looked at me. I thought she'd laugh at me like she usually does, but her eyes were filled with fear instead of amusement. When we went inside, the diner looked empty. Nobody was behind the counter. I called out, and someone must have heard me in the kitchen. Minutes later, a large guy wearing a stained apron came out. He was smiling. I thought he seemed happy and friendly, but there was something about him that was odd. We gave him our orders and we told him that we wanted them to go. I apologized but said we were in a hurry. He didn't say anything, just nodded. I didn't want to stay there for very long because it made me feel so uneasy. My girl must have had the same idea. Pretty soon, the large man, whom we thought was the cook, came out and gave us our food. We paid and told him to keep the change, and then we hightailed it out of there. As I was driving away, I looked at the rearview mirror, fearing I'd see something strange, but no one was there. The road remained empty. When we reached the highway we were on before, we both heaved in an audible sigh of relief. My girlfriend laughed and said we should look up the town on Google Maps, but we never found any mention of Harmony in areas near the Catskill Mountains. She suggested going again by after our camping trip, but I totally refused. She could tell that our experience had shaken me up. I was convinced we somehow found ourselves in a ghost town and that the guy we spoke to was a ghost. One night, me and my coworkers decided to play with a Ouija board outside of work. We talked to a girl named Quinn who said she was a demon. She seemed pretty cool till towards the end of talking to her. We decided we needed to head home because it was like 2 a.m., but she wouldn't let us say goodbye until we promised that if we ever used the Ouija board again, that we would talk to her. About a week later, the place where we worked at caught on fire, so a few days after that, we went to the lake and used the Ouija board again and asked for Quinn. We asked if she started the fire, and she told us that she did. Then it seemed like Quinn got scared or overpowered because the board started acting up, spelled Zozo, and started counting backwards. We quickly said goodbye and moved the planchette to goodbye. About 2 weeks later, I was driving to my friend's house. I should mention that the friend was a girl I was seeing at the time, and she was cheating and using me. I guess Quinn knew because she seemed mad, protecting and jealous when me and my friends mentioned this girl's name the first time we used the board. So on the way to her house, I hydroplaned and flipped my truck. I have to add the Ouija board is in the truck. Some people driving down the road stopped to help get the door open, and I climbed up and out. When the cops arrived, they made sure I was okay and said they had to write me a ticket just because of the accident. I don't have the ticket anymore because this happened about 4 years ago, but the address site of the accident was Route 666, Virginia. Okay, I would like to start off by saying I am not a writer, nor am I a storyteller. I am hoping someone reads this and can relate or enlighten. This was a few years back. I've been too scared and honestly embarrassed to share this story with people other than a few loved ones. Anyway, I was sitting outside of my house in my car. I had just returned home from grabbing a late night snack, so I was sitting there enjoying a smoke before heading in. It was around 1 a.m. Far too late for children to be out walking, especially unattended, but as I am sitting there, 2 children, a boy and a girl, that seemingly appeared out of nowhere start heading towards my car. I immediately am overtaken by anxiety and honestly a little bit of fear. I decided to gather my things and just head inside. I just had a bad feeling. I would like to add that I am not heartless, but I do read and watch the news, and I often hear about children being used as bait for human trafficking. So as I am getting out, they approach. I noticed they both looked pale, and their clothing was old, and almost looked like something children would wear in the 1930s. I may have the wrong decade, but my point is that they were not wearing clothes children typically wear nowadays. I'm sorry for the long drawn out details, but I'm really trying to explain as much as possible in hopes someone comes across this post that can understand how odd this whole situation was. I'm getting out of my car as they approach. They were both looking down, which I also found creepy as opposed to worrisome, but I pretended to be busy, messing with the things in my hands in order to not make eye contact. I'm already socially awkward, so this was my nightmare. The older child, a girl, asked where I was going. I simply responded with, "I'm heading in for the night. Y'all should head home too." I started walking towards my front door, but I could feel them following me, so I asked if they needed help as I was walking. The older sibling said yes and asked if they could come in and wait for their parents. This is where I really started to feel like something was amiss. How would their parents know where to find them? And what would I look like inviting 2 kids into my home at 1 a.m.? I told them I thought it was best if they waited on the porch while I ran in and called the police so we could find their parents. But really, I just wanted my boyfriend to come down in case something weird happened. And boy, did something weird happen. As soon as I shut and locked the door to run upstairs to wake my boyfriend, they immediately started knocking. I was honestly annoyed, but I opened the door so I could yet again explain the plan. That's when I noticed their eyes. They both looked up at me with these piercing black eyes, and almost in unison, asked again if they could come in. By this point, I was trembling with fear. I felt nauseous. I probably should have been kinder, but I quickly responded that they would be safe on the porch for a few minutes while I woke up my boyfriend and called the police. I shut and locked the door again. I headed up the stairs when I heard the knocking again, and oddly enough, as if this whole situation wasn't already odd, I could hear them through the door from the staircase saying, "Ma'am, please welcome us in." No way in hell was I letting them in. So I finally get upstairs to wake my boyfriend, and as I'm trying to explain the whole situation in the dark black eyes, he jumps up quickly, and only half listening, he throws on a shirt and heads downstairs to see what was up with these kids. And would you believe me when I say they were gone? Like poof, gone. Nowhere to be found. My boyfriend would have typically teased me for something like this, but he could sense my panic. I couldn't believe they had disappeared that quickly in those eyes, like nothing I had ever seen. We of course called the police. They more or less just drove through the neighborhood looking for them and then told us to lock our doors. Needless to say, I ordered a ring bell immediately and started doing some research. I firmly believe I had an encounter with 2 black-eyed children, and still to this day I have a hard time sleeping when I think of these 2 kids.
When I was a kid, I lived in a haunted house. I know how that sounds, and I don't want to sound pedantic, but I lived in an actual haunted house. There was never anything sinister throughout most of my childhood. You would see things out of the corner of your eye. You'd come downstairs to find things moved a little. My mom even had her hair pulled in the bathtub once, but it was an isolated incident that never happened again. You'd hear voices, people moving around, and some other noises, but it was nothing major. It was annoying sometimes, but it never really felt threatening. It was something that happened, until my parents decided to sell the house. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and I had just dropped out of college. Medical studies hadn't been for me, and I was just really burnt out and kind of lost. I had been writing since I was like 8, but I hadn't discovered horror yet, and was still trying to hash out something in the fantasy trade. I had a job, and I had my parents' house to fall back on, at least until they informed me they were moving 2 states away. They didn't have a sell-by date for the house yet, but my parents were doing well enough that they could afford to go ahead and pick up another house to flip while they were waiting for this one to sell. They offered me a pretty sweet deal: stay at the house and watch the dogs while they went and got the house ready to move. They'd be back in about 2 to 3 months after they had everything ready, and then they would start moving everything up there officially. If they hadn't sold the house by then, I was more than welcome to keep living in it for a while. This turned out to be moot since I didn't stay in the house longer than about a month. It started out with little things. Things are always going missing in the house. Car keys, coffee cups, and books, but now they were nowhere to be found. I lost my car keys 3 different times in that month, and each time I had to go to the dealership to get a new one made to the tune of about $50. My school textbooks that I was going to sell to a classmate also went missing, as did my Game Boy and a bill that I've been planning on paying to keep myself out of debt. That's just the stuff I can remember, but it was a constant struggle waking up wondering what was going to be missing. The dogs also got very nervous in the house. My parents kept border collies, 2 of them, and they have always been welcome in the house, along with the other menagerie of animals that my mother kept. They had never been uncomfortable coming in and out before, but now they seem to want to live on the back porch rather than in the house. The Florida heat is no joke, and when a long-haired dog would rather sleep on an unair-conditioned back porch than inside your house, you know something is going on. I just chalked it up that they had missed my parents, but I had no idea that it was about to start rattling up. That was about the time that I noticed the shadows. I slept upstairs more than downstairs, feeling safer upstairs in case someone decided to break in. We had neighbors who were less than reputable, and our house had been broken into while we were out on vacation before. I figured that if someone broke in, being upstairs would give me more time to get my gun ready and call the police, but the real problem was already inside the house. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, awoken by a sound or by a feeling, and see things moving in the room. Not really moving in the room, I guess. I'd see the shadows on the wall as they walked behind me or around the bed. I'd turn my head to confront them, but there would be nobody there. The room was always empty, and a search of the house would prove that no one was in there. What's more, even though they were on the back porch, I knew the dogs would pitch a fit if they smelled someone in the house. They might not have liked being in there, but they didn't like anybody else being in there either. I tried sleeping on the couch, but it was the same problem. I'd hear whispery voices and see long shadows up the wall, but when I'd turn over to confront them, they'd be gone. Sometimes I'd hear things moving around if I slept downstairs, so I always made a habit of sleeping upstairs. Most nights I tried to have friends over, people to watch movies with, people to keep me company while I was in the house, but most every night I wound up staying there by myself. I'd stay at friends' houses sometimes, but never for very long. I had responsibilities at the house, and none of their parents were ready for a long-term house guest. I should have left after the shower incident, but I managed to talk myself out of it. I really wanted to believe I had just scratched myself on something. No one wants to believe their childhood house is haunted by hateful spirits. I was in the shower about 3 weeks after they left. I was getting ready for work, soaping my hair, soaping my eyes, when suddenly something scratched my shoulder. I opened my eyes and immediately regretted it, but I started looking around to see if maybe one of the cats scratched me or if I had run up on a hook or something. Mom had little hooks on the walls, so maybe it was that. But they had already been taken down. I didn't see any cats or anything in the bathroom, and I went back to cleaning the soap off myself before inspecting the scratch. It was from my shoulder blade to mid-back, and it looked like 3 long scratches that looked red and a little infected. I put ointment on them and a big band-aid. It was just an accident. These things happened. I fed the dogs and went to work as I always do. When I got in that night, that's when the weirdness really hit a fever pitch. The second I came through the door, it was around midnight. I could swear I heard people upstairs. It sounded like 4 or 5 of them moving around on the second story. I grabbed my dad's gun that I kept by the TV stand and headed upstairs to have a look. I hadn't seen any signs of a break-in, no broken windows or open doors, and wondered how they had gotten in without being seen. My parents had a big house, but most of the easier entryways are in the living room. Unless these guys broke into a back room, I didn't figure they could have gotten in without me noticing. I came up the stairs, barrel leading the way, but as I spun into the large front room where my parents slept, there was no one there. I searched the house, upstairs and downstairs, but I found nothing. It was as if I had imagined the whole things. The dog sleeping peacefully on the back porch led me to believe I was just getting jumpy, and as I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but listen out to make sure that it was just my nerves. When something kicked the front door in, I jumped about a foot. I have been washing my face in the sink, and I winced as the soap poured in my eyes again. I came downstairs several at a time, the gun back out front to find the door open and no one there. I had expected to hear footsteps as I came down the stairs, maybe even people running, but there was no one. It was an empty house with nothing in it. I made another pass of the house, but still found nothing. I was getting jumpy, really not liking what was going on here, and it was getting hard to get ready for bed. I brought the dogs back inside, little as they wanted to come in, and tried to coax them upstairs with me so I could feel like they had a little company. I had known these dogs our whole life. I helped my mum raise them from puppies, and it was the first time I'd heard them growl at me as they stoically refused to go upstairs. They didn't snap, but I got the feeling that if I pressed them out as much, they might. I finally left them downstairs, deciding to close my bedroom door and get some rest. I put a chair under the front door as well. No sense waking up to it slamming open again if it could help it. I managed to get some sleep after someone's successful tossing, but when I did, it was short-lived. In my dreams, people were standing around me whispering. I didn't know who they were. They were people I had never met, and when I rolled over to look at them, they had no faces. They were made of shadows, and I got the feeling they were talking about me. I can't explain why. There's no reason I have to feel that way, but I suddenly knew that I was the subject of their conversation. I rolled over in my dream, not wanting to look at them, and that's when I saw the shadows riding up the wall. They danced and capered across the flat eggshell paint, and I realized I wasn't sleeping anymore. I could feel eyes on my back as I shivered under the covers, and the more awake I came, the more I realized I could still hear the whispered voices. These are the things I've been seeing when I tried to go to sleep every night, and as I came awake, I found that the shadows were still there. Do I stay in the house? Do I go? This was my home. I had always felt welcome there, and this was the first time I'd ever felt it with ease in the house. In the end, I chose not to confront them. I rolled out of bed as quick as I could and ran for the door. The dogs looked at me like I was crazy as I went downstairs, but I didn't really care. I was not staying in that house for another minute. I went to my car, opening the door, but remembering that I left my keys inside. I looked back at the house, but the thought of going back in there made my knees weak. There were no astral lights in the windows, no weird figures looking down at me, but looking at the dark house by night made me never want to go back in there again. I slept in my car till morning, and after the sun came up, I went to go get my keys and a few things. I called a friend of mine and asked if I could spend the night at his place indefinitely, and after telling him what I experienced, he agreed. I don't think he believed me, but I think he believed I had seen something. His mom was the kind of person that believed in almost anything, and when he told her, she insisted that I come to stay. I stayed at his house until my parents sold the place, and then I went to live with my grandma until I got a place of my own. I thought I might be done with the weirdness in the house, but I had one last surprise for me. I went back a few weeks later to help my parents start moving their things onto the truck, and when we lifted the sectional, I found something. Underneath the couch was everything I had been missing, stacked into neat piles and just waiting to be discovered. My dad laughed about it, saying I must be kind of scatterbrained, but I knew I had checked under the couch many times. I helped them move their stuff on the truck, but insisted on being gone before dark. They thought I was being silly, but I never came back there after dusk again. When they sold the house a few months later, I got my stuff out and never went back. My mom got into ghost tours and things later in life and did some research on the place after I told her what I experienced. She was almost giddy when she told me about the checkered past of the house we lived in. Several people had died in that house, and not all of them were of natural causes. There were rumors that two brothers had a duel in the backyard, and one of them was still buried on the property. A boy drowned in the pond that sits at the corner of our land. Several people died of natural causes in the house, and whether or not they are the ones haunting the place, I don't know. I find sometimes in my life that strangeness follows me. It seems to seek me out, and I think that might have been part of the reason I started writing horror. The closer I get to understanding it, the more I know I'll understand my own reasons behind it, and that's not the only strange that's ever happened to me in my life. Perhaps I'll tell you about a few others sometime.